All right, we're going to do this again. I think I had some connection issues there with the internet. So again, Alexis Hughes, North Carolina and South Carolina Realtor with eXp Realty. Just quickly, I do these HOA information videos about once a year. Last year's big topic about the HOA was making sure that if you're buying in a community with an HOA that you have your reserve studies done beforehand, that you make sure that the HOA is financially healthy and being fiscally responsible with the funds that you're paying them, and why that is important. So with that being said, we're going to dive in tonight about HOAs, board of directors, and kind of what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, all that fun stuff, and then kind of what your rights are as homeowners are. So if you already live in an HOA community, what can you do? What can't you do? What are the laws surrounding HOAs and homeowners associations? So many people don't know that any HOA in North Carolina is governed by an actual state law. It's called the North Carolina Planned Community Act. And what that does is that actually outlines certain laws at a state level that an HOA has to abide by. And what a planned community is any community that has an HOA. The importance of reading that North Carolina Planned Community Act is because it tells you exactly in there what your HOA can do at a state level. So different laws and different things trickle down. So you have federal laws that usually can trump state laws depending on the case. Then you have your state laws. Then you have your articles of incorporation, your declarations, your covenants and restrictions, so on and so forth. So it's a trickle-down effect. And the purpose of explaining that is certain types of rules within your CCRs cannot supersede what the county ordinances are. So it's very important to also know what your county ordinances are. There are some things in your HOA CCRs like architectural reviews and why that one tree has to be in the middle of your yard that are there because the town or city that you live in requires that of any community that's planned in the neighborhood. So a lot of the time, some of these really minuscule little aesthetic rules are not in place necessarily by a board of directors that wants to be a pain in the butt. They're there because the town actually has mandated that in order for them to build this community, they have to be there and homeowners have to agree to live by it. So we'll put that out there now. So then you have a couple of other CCRs that are very common. Types of fencing that you can have, what permitted uses for your community can you do, a certain amount of common space area that you have to keep and maintain as open space that is accessible to everyone in the community. Those things are there to keep the values in line in your home. So the reason that's important is because an HOA is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who you are, type of life you want to live, what types of things you like to do, pretty much. But the ultimate goal for a homeowners association is to maintain the value of your homes in your community. So that means any rules that they're coming up with, any violations they're enforcing, all of that is strictly to maintain your home's value. Traditionally, homes that are in an HOA community sell higher than a home that's not in an HOA community. It's not all the time, but that is historically what we see. And the reason being is you have the HOA that handles the entrance, for instance, that makes it look really appealing, that gives you really good curb appeal. You have the HOA that puts the extra amenities in and makes sure that they're handled and maintained. So that's traditionally why we see higher values there. You also have certain factors that the HOA can handle that makes your home more marketable, allows more types of buyers to come in and purchase homes. So you have FHA loans, VA loans, things like that. And since they're government-backed loans, you have to abide by certain rules that the government has set up in your community. For instance, for FHA or VA, they will not allow a borrower to use that type of loan if a community has so many houses in it that are rented versus owned by a home buyer. So it's very important that if you're in an HOA and that you're noticing a lot of rental properties come in, nothing wrong with renters, but that we're maintaining the values of the community by putting rental caps in place. So what we typically like to see is not more than 10% of the homes are rentals. That's a reasonable cap to put in. So you can't go in and say, hey, 90% of the homes cannot, you can't have any kind of homeowners in there. We want all of our houses to be owned by their homeowners. They can't be rented, so on and so forth. You can't do that. But if it's reasonable to maintain the value, then that's protected in the North Carolina Planned Community Act. So that's why you see certain things happening around there. So what I will go into is a very basic view of HOA and kind of what your board members can do. Now, keep in mind that specific CCRs may have different provisions in there. This is just a general, broad overview of it. So a board of directors is elected by a majority of the community, the homeowners. And they're elected because the homeowners feel that they are going to represent the homeowners' wishes well. They're going to keep up the neighborhood well. They're going to enforce rules and everything like that. That is typically why that board of directors is elected. They are elected by you guys, the homeowners. What happens is once they are elected, they have certain duties that they fill. And in those duties, there are certain things they can do with a majority vote by the board of directors. And then there's certain things that they can do, but they have to have a majority vote of the homeowners. So why it's important to read your CCRs is because it spells out in your articles of declaration and your CCRs, which are two totally different documents. It spells out exactly what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what needs a majority vote, what doesn't need a majority vote. Always keep in mind that your town ordinances, your city ordinances are always going to supersede anything the HOA board approves, period. So if one of the noise ordinance for a community is no noise after 7 p.m., well, we can't as an HOA say, hey, our noise ordinance is going to be 10 p.m. Because what's going to happen is that town ordinance is going to supersede our CCR noise ordinance. Again, you really want to make sure that you're being informed. So things that a board of directors can do without having the community vote, which means, as long as a majority of the board of directors agree that these are the right things, then they can move forward without having a meeting or having the community vote. So they can change contractors. They can authorize payments for repairs. They can approve violations, waive violations, assess late fees, penalties, things like that. Normal day-to-day running of the community. That's where a board of directors only needs a majority vote. Where the issue comes in is when you start trying to change certain things within a community. So if you're going to be doing something like annexing a new phase of your community, that needs a majority vote of homeowners to say, okay, yes, we're for this. If you're going to do something like amending your CCRs, you need a majority vote of the homeowners. If you're going to do pool rules, you have to have a majority vote of the homeowners. And then it's a step further, because then your board of directors' job, after the community has voted that's what they want done, then has to amend your CCRs. And not just amend them, they have to be recorded in every county where you want these rules to take place. So for instance, we have a few houses in our neighborhood that are Stanley County, and then we have a multitude of homes that are in Cabarrus County. So any of our CCRs should be getting recorded in both counties so that they are applying to everyone, not just a few here and there. So that's one of the things that your board of directors is responsible for doing. We've had issues in the past. Several of my clients have had issues in the past where they're not happy with their HOA and their board of directors. So there's a lot of things you can do in that scenario. And the number one thing I always say is make sure you're going to the meetings. Make sure that you're staying informed and you're asking questions. A lot of things happen at these meetings that people aren't aware of. So there are things being voted on and things being passed by a majority of homeowners that are present. And the reason why is because per your CCRs, if you have what's called a quorum, and what that means is that a certain percentage of homeowners are present in the community, it can be 10%, it can be 20%, that you're, at that point, you can vote. And whatever the majority of the people present at that meeting vote in can be adopted into reality. This goes for electing your board members. This goes for, certain things like approving a budget. I see you guys down there. Thank you. So what happens is you usually will have about 10 or 11 people that come to these meetings, and it's usually the same people. And all these changes over the years are being determined by the same exact people. But then homeowners are unhappy because they didn't know the vote was taking place on this, or they didn't know that the meeting was happening. So in those cases, you have disgruntled homeowners. So it's very important that you're sending out notices, that you're giving people adequate time, you're letting them know what the meeting is going to be about. What I tell homeowners all the time is don't go to a meeting based off of if it's something that's important to you, because you never know what's going to come up at that meeting that wasn't originally on the docket. And if a majority of members are there at that meeting and they vote to bring up a new topic and it passes, then it can be voted on. So make sure you're going to those meetings. We all understand that everybody has lives. So most HOAs have what's called a proxy. And what a proxy is if you can't be there in person, you can designate someone to be there in your place. It has to be done in writing, and it has to be filed with the secretary of the HOA usually, but you can still vote and be heard. And then you need to make sure that any minutes from the meeting that you're keeping up with them as well. That's been a big issue. As boards change over the years, sometimes you'll have a secretary on the board that's super, super, super detail oriented. And then you have a new election and that secretary is maybe not so much. They think a quick shout out on Facebook letting you know what happened is appropriate. So another thing, making sure that your board of directors has an outline of how they're going to handle things, how they're going to let the community know things. That way everybody's on the same page. If the majority of the community is online and that's where you're going to communicate, well, everybody needs to know that, and vice versa. Easiest way is send it out through mail. If you're getting your notice for your dues, then you should be getting all of other notices for meetings and such. What we'll talk about now is what happens when you elect a board or a board was elected without your knowledge and they're making decisions you're unhappy with. They are not representing you adequately, you feel, or they're not performing their job duties as the homeowners feel they should. So you have two things you've got to keep in mind. You as one disgruntled homeowner cannot do anything about that. You have to wait until the next election, and you have to come in and you have to vote and you have to hope for a change. The problem and the remedy arises when there is a majority of homeowners in the community that feel the same way you do. And in that case, you can call what's called a special meeting as long as a majority of homeowners are voting for it. And you can vote to have any of the board members removed. That is something that per the North Carolina Planned Community Act, and that supersedes all your CCRs and articles of incorporation, that you can do as a homeowner. That is your recourse if you feel things are happening that should not be happening. And then it's important to make sure everybody in that group of majority understand the importance of being there or naming that proxy person, naming someone that's going to vote in their place. Super important. So when that happens, you essentially have to decide what's more important, my community and the direction it's heading, and who do I feel can lead this community in the right direction? And that's where big issues arise. If you are a homeowner and it's something that's not really a community matter, so for instance, you constantly are getting violations because of your trash cans. A board of director, they don't want to enforce these violations on you, but they're there for a reason, and some of them are city and town ordinances. So in those scenarios, reach out to your board of directors and tell them, say, hey, my trash cans are out because I don't get off work, or explain the situation. The board of directors can say, yes, we're going to waive this for them, or no, we're not. The big issue comes into play is federal fair housing. So if you're going to waive something for one scenario, you have to do it for another person in the same scenario. So it's very important that there's documentation in writing. So you may ask, well, I called and I talked to him and he said it was okay. But for your protection, the board's protection, and your HOA's protection, everything should be in writing. If you have a management company, reach out to the management company for things like that. That management company is going to pass that along to the board of directors. The board of directors will vote on that as a majority. And if it passes, you'll get notification that it was waived. If it doesn't, you'll get notification and you'll be told why. If it's something like architectural approval, yes, read your CCRs. You may have to get approval for certain things you're doing to the exterior of your home. And the reason for that is we have to make sure that it's in line with those town ordinances, those city ordinances, everything like that, to maintain your home's value. Not to be a pain in your butt, but it maintains your home's value. A lot of people don't realize that when they buy a home that has an HOA, they sign at closing on their deed agreeing to abide by these rules. So you've got to make sure that when you're buying, you know that you definitely can abide by those rules. And what that means is I have clients, and my clients come to me and they're like, yes, we want to buy this house in Millbridge, and Millbridge is amazing and it's awesome. And I start talking to them a little more, and come to find out they love boating. They love it so much they have their own boat. Well, we need to look at Millbridge's CCRs if they plan on keeping that boat on their property, because Millbridge does not allow for that. So then they've got to think about storage fees and things like that. So that's where really, like, if you're working with an agent, they should be asking you these questions. If you are that type of person that has to have a shed, you need a shed. We need to know beforehand if your HOA will allow it. If you're the person that you have to have a 6-foot privacy fence and a 4-foot aluminum slatted fence isn't going to work, let's read the CCRs. So a lot of it comes down to education and knowing where to get these items. So typically, a board should have these items readily available for you. If they are not readily available for you, you can reach out to the association management company and request them from them. If the HOA has a website, you can get it from there as well. So these are all different avenues that you can take. You also are entitled to the financials. You're entitled to the minutes. What I will say about the minutes is, when the board of directors has a meeting, a lot of times certain topics that are being discussed have to be discussed off record because they are confidential. At least if you paint your front door purple, Lord have mercy on your soul. They're very confidential in those matters. So we have to discuss those off record. Certain things that are confidential, and this is up to the board's discretion usually, but certain things are like particular homeowners and if they're behind on dues and what's being done and all kinds of stuff like that. Obviously, we're not going to publish those in public meeting minutes, but you should have a good record of the meetings that are occurring and what's being discussed. And that should be something that you're getting regularly. HOA board of directors can meet as many times or as little times as they want. Usually it's pretty healthy if an HOA board is meeting at least once a month, just because a lot of things happen with the community. There needs to be a lot of transparency there rather than a lot of secrecy. And, you know, it's up to you as the homeowner to educate yourself, to know exactly what you signed up for and what you bought, and to stand up for things that you don't want. It's your community, and if the majority of the neighborhood agrees with you on certain items, then you need to fight for that and feel comfortable for that. What I will say is being on the board of directors is a very, very hard job. They're not paid for that, and they deserve the utmost respect that they can get, because it is a hard job. But part of taking on that responsibility is doing it the right way, and your job as a homeowner is to ensure that they are doing that. So that's really the nuts and bolts of all things HOA tonight. Basically what it is and how you guys can get out of a sticky situation if you're in one right now, and just kind of understanding some of the ins and outs of it. So if anybody has any questions, you can type them in the chat box below. But if there are not any questions, I'm going to jump off here. As always, I'm always here to answer any questions for anyone. 704-773-2117. And I will try and point you in the right direction for your specific situation. Does anyone have any questions for me? All right, guys. I'm going to jump off here. I hope you guys have a great night. Happy Monday, and I hope the rest of your week goes well.